This is a brief response to Dr. James Tabor's book, Paul and Jesus, How the Apostle Transformed Christianity. Today we're going to focus on the resurrection. We'll leave Paul's Christology and end times vision for another time. We Baha'is under the covenant, loyal students of Dr. Leland Jensen, don't believe it's a coincidence that scholarship like Dr. Tabor's is emerging now at what we consider to be the close of the age. He comes very close to the truth of the resurrection as explained by Dr. Jensen. To grasp the real meaning of the resurrection, we have to begin with two key lessons of Jesus. First, Jesus taught in parables, short, simple stories used to teach spiritual lessons. All this Jesus said to the crowds in parables. Indeed, he said nothing to them without parables. He did not speak to them without a parable, but privately to his own disciples, he explained everything. And speaking to his apostles, he said, "To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of God. But for others, they are in parables, so that seeing they may not see, and hearing they may not understand." So clearly, Jesus hid important truths in stories, only revealed once hearts were ready to receive them. The second important lesson to this discussion appears in the Gospel of John. "He who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and greater works than these will he do." These works include how to teach in parables. Far from being ignorant or superstitious followers, Jesus taught his apostles well. The resurrection story that they promulgated may just be the most important parable of all. Now, like many scholars before him, Dr. Tabor points out the differences between the various resurrection accounts. He writes, "In Luke and John, Jesus walks around, wounds and all, eating meals and claiming he is still flesh and bones, directly contradicting Paul's assertion that Jesus has become a life-giving spirit. It is a mistake to allow these later texts of Luke and John to take priority over earlier materials." He's right to see the tension, but we don't think it's a mistake to take the later accounts seriously. And by seriously, I don't mean literally. As the gospel story developed in time, from Paul to Mark to Matthew to Luke and to John, the figure of Jesus did become more miraculous, more superhuman, more mythical. By the time we reach the later narratives, we see the full-formed mythical Jesus, a God-man who literally rises from the dead and appears in bodily form. But within those later, more embellished accounts, there is important symbolism for those with eyes to see. In John 6:56, Jesus says, "He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him." At the Last Supper, Jesus gives his apostles bread and wine and tells them that they are his flesh and blood, representing respectively his teachings and his covenant. So when, after the crucifixion, the risen Christ says, "See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit has not flesh and bones, as you see that I have." It may seem that he's referring to his own body, but in fact, he's pointing to them, to the apostles themselves, in whom Jesus now abided. Symbolically, they had eaten his flesh and drank his blood. His spirit came back to life, abiding in their flesh and bones. After the crucifixion, the apostles were in despair. How could their crucified leader have possibly been the great Messiah of the Jews? Their faith was shattered. They were, in effect, spiritually dead. But 3 days and 3 nights later, when they finally understood, when they realized it was all part of the prophecy, that Jesus was the first Messiah, the suffering Messiah, not the close of the age Messiah, when it finally dawned on them that the Spirit of Christ was within them, they rose from their spiritual death. They were the resurrection. The resurrection story, then, isn't about a corpse reviving in a tomb, any more than the parable of the sower is about the fate of a handful of seeds. Rather, it's about hearts raising up to divine reality. The resurrection was the birth of a new living church, a body of believers animated by the Spirit of truth. The apostles understood that Christ was risen in glory, first as the early church, but that in time his life-giving Spirit would return in the glory of the Father, that Christ would return to establish God's kingdom on earth. The resurrection story, culminating in the later Gospels as a seemingly literal event, was not an error. It was divine strategy. As Dr. Leland Jensen taught, this powerful legend carried the seed of truth across civilizations, concealing deeper mysteries from those unwilling to think spiritually, while giving humanity a story powerful enough to outlast empires. Now, the veil can fall away. We can see the resurrection for what it truly is, not one man's escape from biological death, but the rising of the divine Spirit within all of humanity. This is the preparation for God's kingdom on earth. And that brings us to our age's test. Those clinging to the mythical Jesus, waiting for a body to descend on a literal cloud, risk missing the Spirit of truth speaking today from the figurative digital cloud. When in the 19th century Christ returned in the glory of the Father, most of the world didn't recognize him because they sought the mythical, not the real Jesus. The true resurrection was never a biological miracle to prove or disprove. It's a parable of spiritual transformation, now fully revealed through Baha'u'llah and his establisher, Dr. Leland Jensen, the return of Jesus the High Priest. The story isn't over. It's unfolding now. Visit schooloftheland.com to discover the deeper meaning awakening in our time.